The Kingdom of Benin, Art, Power, and Plunder. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to uncover the epic, multi-century rise, fall, and lasting legacy of one of West Africa's absolutely most highly developed ancient kingdoms. We're diving into a civilization that was flourishing way before European contact. I'm talking about a kingdom that built massive walls, engineered a totally unique bureaucracy, and created some of the most breathtaking art the world has literally ever seen. Let's get right into it.
But, before we get to their incredible rise, we really have to pause and ask a pretty difficult question. How did thousands of priceless West African artifacts, items that essentially hold the very soul and history of a people, end up sitting behind glass as trophies in European museums? It's kind of a wild mystery involving centuries of trade, betrayal, and a really devastating clash of empires. So to understand how we got here, we've got to jump back to the very beginning.
And to do that, we need to understand exactly how this kingdom recorded its own history. You see, the ancient inhabitants of the Benin Kingdom were a non-literate society. They didn't just write their history down in books, they cast it in bronze and brass. Have you ever heard of the lost wax method? It's an incredibly intricate metallurgical casting process that these artisans completely mastered well before the 13th century. It allowed them to create these highly detailed, premium quality metalworks. And these weren't just everyday decorations. These were their literal history books, capturing the great deeds of their kings, their deepest legends, and their royal occasions. It's just phenomenal.
Part 1. The Ancient Origins. Let's look at how this kingdom actually built its foundation in the dense, swampy tropical rainforests of present-day Nigeria. It was a really challenging environment, but one that bred a deeply resilient society. Tracing their timeline, we see this really clear evolution of power. For about a century, right between 1150 and 1250, the region was ruled by the Ogiso dynasty. They were known as the kings of the land or the kings of the sky. But then, around 1300, a massive shift happens. Iwika I establishes the Oba dynasty, which basically cemented this lineage of supreme, absolute authority. Fast forward a bit, and the kingdom reaches these totally unprecedented heights between 1440 and 1470 under Oba Iware. He conquered neighboring towns, rebuilt the capital, and officially ushered in what's known as Benin's Golden Age. And all of this set the perfect stage for 1472, which was a fateful year, because that's when the first Portuguese explorers sailed right into the Bight of Benin. At its peak, the Benin Kingdom functioned as a highly sophisticated polis. I mean, they developed a masterly bureaucracy that was completely unique in pre-colonial Africa. They had this incredibly organized guild system just to manage specialized trades. We're talking massive city walls and really deep defensive moats to protect their capital. And politically, it's fascinating. They perfectly balanced the absolute supreme power of the Oba with a council of chiefs. And this council actually managed 10 distinct semi-independent kingdoms right beneath the monarch. So it was this really complex, brilliant blend of monarchical power and highly structured civil administration. Part 2, the Golden Age and European arrival. This brings us to a really pivotal era. Let's see what happened when this thriving African empire made its very first contact with Europe. It's an interaction that would absolutely change the continent forever. Back in the 15th century, the initial contact was surprisingly diplomatic. Portuguese explorers engaged in this mostly peaceful trade. They're exchanging guns, coconuts, and highly prized coral beads for Benin's ivory, pepper, and local textiles. In fact, those coral beads became a massive status symbol, a profound mark of affluence among Benin's nobility. But things take a very dark turn. By the 17th century, the entire motive of European contact shifted violently. The focus completely moved away from trading goods like palm oil and textiles and tragically pivoted straight to the transatlantic trade of human beings. The staggering scale of this shift is honestly hard to overstate. Just listen to this quote. For every slave in Benin were about 10 bullet or cannonball rifled guns. Think about that. This immense influx of weapons fundamentally destabilized the entire region. Warfare basically became a constant, everyday part of life. The insatiable foreign demand for enslaved people led to the complete abandonment of once picturesque villages, an immense loss of life, and the brutal fracturing of communities. The Golden Age of Benin was effectively over.
Part 3. The 1897 invasion. As the 19th century was drawing to a close, European powers were ruthlessly carving up the continent in what's known as the Scramble for Africa. And this leads us directly to the violent end of Benin's sovereignty.
Here is how it went down.
In late 1896, British agents were ambushed by Benin leaders in what the British quickly termed the Benin Massacre. And the retaliation to this was swift, and it was completely devastating. By February of 1897, a so-called punitive expedition led by British Admiral Harry Rawson attacked Benin City with heavy explosive cannon fire. The invasion was absolute. The city's legendary of defenses were breached, magnificent royal palaces were destroyed, the Oba was forced into exile, and treaties of annexation were signed under duress. Just like that, the independent Kingdom of Benin was suddenly absorbed into the British Empire. And right alongside that military conquest came absolute cultural devastation. 2,500, let that sink in. That is the staggering approximate number of religious and historical artifacts that were looted directly from the royal palaces during that 1897 invasion. The British essentially stripped the kingdom of its bronze plaques, its carved ivory, its royal heads, basically everything that held the visual and spiritual history of the Edo people. The source puts it like this: these items are portrayed as trophies of conquest, war, and imperial exploits in museums and expansive private collections. By stealing these bronzes, the invaders weren't just taking valuable art, They were effectively ripping out the pages of the kingdom's recorded history. They deprived an entire civilization of its original meanings, its traditional lifeways, and its avenues for cultural renewal. Part 4. Independence and Instability. Now, let's jump forward past decades of colonial rule to August 1st, 1960. Benin finally achieved independence. But, as we'll see, inheriting a fractured state brought some incredibly severe growing pains. During the long decades of the British protectorate, local development was largely neglected in favor of forced crop planting for colonial export. So when independence finally arrived in 1960, the new parliamentary government faced this massive uphill task of building a state basically from scratch. And this led to wild instability. We're talking a 100% increase in civil servants in just 2 years as politicians packed ministries with all their allies. This chaos eventually triggered a whole series of military coups, completely plunging the nation into military rule from 1969 through the late 1970s and totally suspending traditional civil administration. Because of all this structural instability, the modern government was staring down immense socioeconomic challenges. They inherited a moribund railway system and super poor feeder roads, which obviously severely hampered agriculture. Educational performance dropped abysmally. That fueled chronic unemployment and a really massive brain drain of highly educated citizens who just left the country. On top of all this, deep frictions started emerging between the traditional historical power of the restored Obas and the newly formed political administration. Rebuilding a nation is incredibly difficult when the foundations you're building on are already cracked. Part 5. Reclaiming the heritage. This brings us to today. The modern struggle for socioeconomic stability is actually deeply tied to the ongoing fight to reclaim a stolen cultural identity. Because honestly, you can't fully rebuild a nation's future without securing its past. For decades now, there has been a really strong push to bring the Benin bronzes home. But the actual physical scope of returning artifacts has been incredibly small, especially when you compare it to the thousands of objects that were looted. Now, sure, there have been some minor returns through art tours or individual museum agreements, but the vast majority of Benin's historical artwork still remains captive in foreign lands, very often stalled by international bureaucratic delays and just endless temporization. The Edo people have this profoundly beautiful proverb: when the mighty hunter kills a goat, he should not eat its flesh alone. It's such a powerful reminder of shared humanity and justice. It really forces us to stop and question the morality of foreign institutions hoarding the sacred history of another culture under the guise of education. The people of Benin are still out there, waiting for the return of their history. So, as we wrap up our look at the legacy of the Benin Kingdom and the true, lasting cost of imperial conquest, we have to ask ourselves, can a culture ever truly heal if its most sacred stories are locked away in someone else's display case? Thanks for exploring this with me today.